A&R with Adam R. All right, I have Cloyd Steiger. How you doing, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on. Very much appreciated. Go ahead and
Sure
tell
thing.
everyone who you are and your background.
Well, I worked for the Seattle Police Department for 36 years. The last 22 of those, I worked as a homicide detective. After I left there, I worked for almost 5 years as the chief criminal investigator for the Washington State Attorney General's homicide investigation tracking system, which is a database for the Northwest region that tracked homicides and hope to make linkage up. It was actually the job was created by Bob Keppel, who I knew for 30 some years, and he's recently passed away, but he's a big name in the criminal investigation game in the nation. And that's who I am. I've written a couple books, one about my career called Homicide, Homicide, The View from Inside the Yellow Tape. And the other one was, I was approached by a publishing company, asked me to write a book, and it was called Seattle's Forgotten Serial Killer, Gary Gene Grant. And that's what I'm doing. That's who I am.
I got to tell you, prior to doing a podcast, whatever else, so I watched a program a few years ago, and it was about the Zodiac. And so I was like, serial killers, they come and go. They're popular for whatever reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I didn't realize how often this is happening. It blew my mind to find out there was more serial killers in current than what I thought there were. I thought that was just a once in a blue moon thing. Turns out it's pretty common.
Well, the thing is, I tell people all the time, 98% of serial killers nobody's ever heard of, right? They're just guys that kill 3 or 4 people here and there. You hear the big ones, Ted Bundy, Gary Ridgway, Zodiac Killer, people like that. But, really, most serial killers you've never heard of. And the other thing I tell people is serial killers don't look like Hannibal Lecter. If they did, they'd be really easy to avoid, right? They look like your neighbor down the street or the guy that delivers your mail or maybe the deacon of your church, like the BTK killer was.
Yeah, like Ted Bundy was very charismatic.
That's, of course, that happened. That's all started right here in my backyard. And that's Bob Keppel, who I mentioned earlier, had created the job at the HITS job, a homicide investigative tracking system, was one of the lead detectives on the Keppel case in the Seattle area. And then, and he actually was down in Florida when Keppel was executed and interviewed him for a few hours and took some interesting recordings with him.
It's scary, man. I mean, that guy crossed the country, and then some of these other killers that are, again, like Netflix recently put one out about the Night Stalker. I didn't even know that happened. I had no idea that happened.
Yeah. Richard Ramirez. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, the thing you hear about the big count ones, but really most serial killers kill 3 or 4, maybe 5, and you just don't hear about them, right? I've investigated 2 different serial killers myself personally, where I had primary investigative responsibility in the Seattle area, and most people haven't heard about them. They were just, they're out there killing prostitutes or whatever, and they do 3 or 4, and then we get them. And so it's really, it's not of the big picture of the thousands and thousands of murders happening every year. They're probably 2%, but they do attract the most attention. No doubt about it.
It's insane because it's the activity currently bothers me, especially it's not, you would think there would be a platform that would keep this in the media's attention. I guess they don't do it so they don't want to cause hysteria.
Right. Well, there's a lot of reasons. You don't want, there have been historic things where the media actually interfered with the investigation. But the thing, people ask me all the time, are we going to see these guys that do 30 or 40 murders? And I don't think so, because forensic science has advanced so far that you'll get them after 2 or 3, right? You'll identify them, and they won't be able to get those big numbers like they did in the 80s and 70s.
Yeah, I was recently watching something, after I figured I was going to have you on, I was watching a couple of these to get kind of caught up. And there was a guy who's 19 years in the 19 years, right? In California, I think it was.
Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, because back then, I mean, I tell people all the time, back in those days, they had a toolbox with a hammer and a saw. Now detectives have an entire construction crew with hydraulics and everything. The tools available are so much better now. And so the chances of the person getting away for long term are much smaller than they used to be.
Agreed. And thankful for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because it's as I think for whatever reason, and again, watching that Night Stalker, I saw people in the courtroom like celebrating him. And there was women that were trying, I can't wrap my head around that. You know?
Well, that's a whole nother issue. These women that glom onto these serial killers and marry them in jail. And Bundy had one or two of those. And it's like, what the hell's going on there? Right. That's a whole nother psychological issue for the women.
Yeah,
that glom onto these people. Yeah,
there's got to be some psychology out there or some psychologists working on that, right? That's
oh, sure there are. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are forensic psychologists, forensic psychiatrists, and they looked into that stuff and they write about it extensively.
Yeah, my brother's he's a psychologist over in Oregon, and I kind of talk with him time to time about the subject,
right?
And then, in the back of my mind, it's like long distance Stockholm syndrome. It's really
absolutely. That's what it's
bizarre.
So, what's going on with these women that glom onto these guys and want to marry them in prison and stuff? And,
well, it's the guys too, because then the guys are dressing like him, and that bothered me more. Because then how do you? You don't know what fragile mind you influence to go out there and do awful things. No, I mean,
I got news for you. When you're sitting across from that guy and your visitation, he's looking at you, and you think he loves you. He's fantasizing about what he would do if he killed you. And what would you do to your body? That's what's going on. People don't realize that. Yeah.
So in your career in homicide, and I'm sure you've seen it, at some point, do you become desensitized to what you're seeing?
Yeah. I mean, you have to mentally separate yourself from what you're doing, because if you didn't, you would be all screwed up. You got to be. There's a work mode and there's a home mode, and the two are not the same, right?
Right.
Like I always tell people, my home life is PG-13, but my work life is MA-17, right? Because it's just two different things.
Yeah, it's very graphic, and I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely graphic. Yeah.
It's not like shows or movies where there's some blood.
No.
I couldn't imagine the things you saw in your career.
Well, the blood, the gore, the smells that you can't get on a TV movie. I tell you what, the worst movies you ever see of the goriest things don't even come close to touching what it's really like to have a mutilated body.
Yeah, I imagine. Some years ago I worked in a hospital, and I was observing a kyphoplasty, and I got lightheaded from that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I always say I think I was programmed to this job because it didn't affect me to that level. I mean, I could look at it. I look at a mutilated body like a mechanic looks at a broken transmission on a car. That doesn't mean I don't have empathy for the person and the family. I do, but when I'm in work mode, I'm in work mode. I can't let that in. I have to just keep, because my job is to get the son of a bitch that did this. Right.
And you obviously mentally programmed to be prepared for a lot of that.
I am. Yeah. Absolutely. Nothing shocks me anymore. You couldn't think of anything. There's nothing you could tell me or show me that would shock me. I'm just,
So in your cases with the serial killers that you investigated, what was that like for you in that scenario?
Well, when you get it at first, you don't realize you have a serial killer. You just have, it's a murder, right? And you're looking at it and you're doing stuff. And then the next one comes along and you go, wow, that kind of sounds a lot like that other one that we had a couple months ago over here, and then by the third one, and you realize the geography of it, they're all within a mile of each other, and in the MO and the signatures, you go. I remember the first serial killer I had, it was in the late 90s, and by the third scene, I was looking where I was standing over the body, looking, and I could almost see the other two scenes, and that was the first time I thought to myself, I think this is a serial killer. I really do. That was the first time I ever let that come into my mind. But you can't glom onto that and assume it is, because you'll go off on some tangent that may be not right. So you investigate each case independently, but eventually it was like, yeah, these are all the same person, and then the first guy I got, we had him and we were driving around in a car. He had confessed to one of the murders, and I told my partner, I said, drive past the scene of the second murder. And as we drove down the street, passed the scene, his eyes locked on it, and I saw his head turn as we went by. And I said, "You did that one too, didn't you?" And he kind of went, "Yeah."
Yeah. See, so was that guy guilty? No, right?
Oh yeah. Okay. He was. Yeah.
How
yeah,
often,
he did it.
Do you often find, I see this in movies, and I don't know this to be true, but is it often that people confess to murders that they didn't do for, I guess, to be sensationalized?
Well, sometimes. This guy tried to confess to a bunch of, we had him on 3, and he tried to confess to a bunch of different ones that he didn't do, and I knew he didn't do them because the 3 he did, he could tell us the infinitesimal details of every case, but the ones that he tried to confess to that were real murder scenes, he didn't know anything about. Right now, I was like, don't bullshit me. I'm sorry. This is, you
speak freely. Don't worry about it.
He was trying to make himself a bigger, badass than he was. And so, that happened. And I've had people try to confess to me of cases they didn't do. And it, if you know the case, they didn't do it because what they're saying doesn't match, right? If they know, it's going to all line up. But if they don't know, if they didn't do it, it's not going to line up at all. And you can't just go with, oh yeah, he did it because he said he did it. No, you can't do that. You have to show me some corroboration or something that says this is the guy that did this because he knows this, and only the killer would know this. And that's why, you don't release all the details of the case in the media when it happens. The book I wrote about the serial killer, Gary Eugene Grant, who was before my time, it was in the late 60s, early 70s. Somebody else confessed to one of the murders that didn't do it, right? Oh. And they actually charged him with the murders. And I went back and how did he know? Because he seemed to know a lot of the details. Well, everything was released in the paper. This is a small department that released everything. Every little minor detail they released to the newspaper was printed. And this guy read it, and he was kind of a nut, and he confessed to it, and he didn't do it.
That's strange.
You got to be careful of that. That's why you have to hold things back. When you talk to somebody that did a murder, I always ask them specific questions that only the person that did it could possibly know. And if they don't know the answer, they didn't do it, right? If the people that did it, they tell you, like, for example, in a building, apartment building. Oh, where was the apartment? Okay, it was on the 7th floor. Well, when you come off the elevator, where did you go? Well, I went out a little bit and turned left. Well, if that's true, it's true. But if it's not, it's not. It's obvious, right?
Right.
And you look for things like that. You ask questions to corroborate, so this person isn't bullshitting you. They're telling you what's true. And believe me, that you'd think it's ridiculous that people try to confess to crimes they didn't do, but it does happen.
That's got to be aggravating, right? Especially when you're usually investigating.
They're nuts. Yeah, usually they're nuts.
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to investigate a very serious matter, and someone throws that in the loophole. I mean, that's got to be super aggravating.
Yeah, it is. But it's usually, in my experience, it's not that hard to figure it out. If you just listen to what they're saying, if these people say stuff is not true, you got to go right away. Time out. This is BS. This didn't happen. But what's their motive for doing this? I don't know.
Yeah, back to what I said earlier, I guess it makes sense now. Why is it not publicly known, and why there's something? I guess you're right, because if you make it too public, it allows those sort of people like, oh, I did it. I mean, that makes sense.
They'll know all the facts of the thing and just regurgitate them to you. Where if you want to tell me you did this, and you got to tell me something that I know, but nobody else knows, and and if it's right, then I know you're telling me the truth. But usually that isn't the case. It's not. They don't know, so you just move on.
At any given time in our country, how many serial killers do you think are active?
Oh man, I get asked that all the time, and it's not as much as people think. I would guess at any given time, there's probably 6 or 7 in the entire nation that are active.
That's still a lot to me.
It is a lot, yeah, but they're spread out over the entire nation.
Until I started researching this, I thought it was a rare thing spread through decades. I didn't realize how commonplace it was.
Well, it is. I mean, if you compare it to the total number of murders, like I said, it's 1 or 2%.
Right.
But it does happen, and it's less and less now because people are getting caught in the first one or the second one and not getting to the numbers but there's, I got to tell you, there is evil in this world, and a lot of people are naive and think, oh, everyone's nice. No, everyone's not nice. They're just plain evil in this world, and people, for whatever reason, however they're raised, can be psychopaths, and they think no more of a victim than you when you drink a pop and throw that can in the garbage. That that serial killer and psychopath thinks nothing more of their victim than that, because the victim is just something to satisfy their desires. It has no human empathy, and the people that don't think those people exist are idiots, because they do exist. I've sat and looked in the eye of pure evil many times, right? And yeah, and they just don't care, right? They don't care. They don't understand why I care. So
right.
That's it. It exists.
Yeah. If you ever want about evil, like if you ever want a real example of misconduct and poor, mean-spirited people, just go on social media.
No, yeah,
in a heartbeat about that. Yeah, you could say the sweetest thing in the world, and someone will find some reason to scrutinize.
Oh, really? Can be offended by it. Yeah,
it's insane.
But it's not. Yeah. But it takes up another level to harm you physically for it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. When I was a kid and you called each other names, it's because you were accepted. Now it's forget it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But I think the separation and the anonymity on social media helps. That they say things to you on social media they would never say to your face.
Oh yeah, much more brave over the wire. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, they might get thumped, right? Yeah,
it's like the guy on the couch is criticizing the MMA fighter. Meanwhile, he ever got in the
ring. Exactly.
So, I got to ask. So, what do you think in your discovery so far? What triggers the behavior, or are they mostly born into it, or is there a circumstance, or is it?
Well, that's a whole nurture or nature, right?
Right.
And I think, first of all, there is, and I have a friend who's a criminologist in Canada, and he did a study about people who have a propensity for psychopathy or to be psychopaths, and it's partially genetic, but then again, it has to be fed by the nurture in the first 2 or 3 years of your life. That has so much effect on how you'll be the rest of your life, whether you're able to, your parents or your mother settled you down when you're upset, or they just let you scream, right? The ability to self calm yourself is something. And with children, babies, it's so important to hug the baby and to hold the baby. And, so people that don't that have that happen, if they already have the propensity for psychopath, it just encourages it. And not everybody who's raised in a bad infant childhood turns out to be a psychopath. But for example, this friend of mine, Peter Vronsky, who's written several books on serial killer, he had this hypothesis that there's certain traits you could track that indicate a psychopath. And so he did this study, and one of his assistants said, "What do you think of this guy?" And they looked at his chart, and he goes, "Oh yeah, that guy's definitely a psychopath." Well, ended up being Peter Vronsky's chart, his own, and he wasn't a psychopath. And it's because he had the propensity for it, but his upbringing overcame that, right?
Right.
But that's the big question: chicken or the egg, nurture, nature. That's the big question in this type of stuff.
Yeah, if you teach a lot of affection, I imagine affection something like for my families, my family and other families. Like when you're very affectionate, you only know how to be very affectionate,
right?
Right. That's why they're such passionate arguers.
Yeah, though that's true. Yeah, I mean the thing is, really, when you have a child who's left in a crib all day to cry for themselves and nobody ever comes and soothes them, if they already have the propensity for a psychopathy, there's a good chance they're going to end up being psychopaths because they just don't have that. Whereas, and some people, like I said, some people can have that terrible upbringing and not be psychopaths because they didn't necessarily have that propensity to begin with. Were their parents psychopaths? Is it genetic? I don't know, right? But it's the big question. And I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but there's a lot of interesting studies about that.
Right. So are there any strategies you guys use or protocols to kind of help identify them?
Well, by the time I get involved, it's too late, right?
Yeah, it's hard. Late. Like there's like that movie Minority Report. You're not going to see what they're doing, but I can't say that look for signs because Ted Bundy, I keep referring to that guy, was very charismatic. It was strange.
He on the surface, but it was all a facade.
Right.
I actually did a documentary on Ted Bundy a couple years ago. Somebody was doing it out of I forgot where they were out of, but anyway, they came and filmed me, and I said, everybody talks about Ted Bundy and how charismatic and nice he was. I said he wasn't nice at all. He was he was a son of a bitch that caused misery everywhere he went.
Right.
And he had this facade, a chameleon of pretending, because he was imitating what people act like. He didn't feel that at all.
That's the scariest part. He was wearing a mask.
That is the scariest part. He could just imitate it.
Yeah, he's wearing a mask, right, to disguise who he was.
A mask. Yeah.
So then you got to wonder how many of them are like that.
Well, there were issues about Bundy, about whether he was a subject of they believe he was the subject of an incestuous relationship. He believes his grandfather was really his father and all this stuff and it caused all kinds of problems. And his mother, he grew up thinking his mother, Louise, was his older sister until he was like 17. And he found out she was his mother. And it was a weird thing for him. He was born in a home for unwed mothers in Vermont. And he went back there in the area for the Republican National Committee, convention in the 70s sometime. And there was a house right next door to the house he was born in, and a young girl who worked there was found murdered. And people wonder if he did it. And I'm pretty sure he did do it, because he had this whole issue with his mother lying to him, saying she was his sister until he was older. And, I think his grandfather was an evil man who raped his mother. And I think he was probably his father, I'm sorry. And, his mother was nice enough, but yeah, he had a whole issue. And then, you could spend an hour and a half or 2 hours on Ted Bundy.
It's his stories. It's a crazy one.
Yeah, he's the kind of quintessential serial killer everybody compares every other serial killer to.
Yeah,
and some are like him, but most aren't.
Like when I was a kid and I saw a photo of Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah,
I was like, what? It was really hard for me to believe that guy to be like this monster. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
it really was.
But he was. Yeah, no doubt about it.
I mean, there's another case where the guy I forget his name. He was like 6'8". He was a big dude. But
oh my God.
And he turned himself in. And then he cooperated. Yeah. And I think there's someone who's told me, let me see this paper here. Someone said that there's a show called Mindhunter, and I haven't seen it yet. And they're depicting him in that show.
Yes, that's true. I know his name. It just escaped me. He befriended the police, and he had a bowling bag, and he went to see these police officers with his bowling bag and would talk to him. Ed Kemper, that's his name.
Yeah. Yep.
And his mother's head was in the bowling bag when he met with him.
Jesus. Yeah. and nonchalant, like it's normal.
The boy ain't right.
Yeah. My goodness. I was again prepping for your podcast. I was watching some small documentaries, and when his came up, everything about that was strange. Like the whole.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you hear about what his triggers were. It's undoubtedly some form of abuse from childhood and neglect.
Oh yeah, at least emotional abuse, if not physical. Yeah, absolutely.
And then, some people ask, like, well, how could that possibly affect your brain and make you do those things? Well, then you look at a kid that was captive in North Korea in 2016, right. And he came home and he was broken.
Right, absolutely.
It's horrible what you can do to the human mind. So,
oh yeah, I mean, it's not that difficult either. People think, because people are always judging it from what their experience is, and they've never been. Like I said, I tell people all the time that you live in your own little bubble, and which is good. You don't know the evil that's around you, but I've met that evil hundreds of times in my life.
I can imagine.
I've sat across from, and it's just like, they exist. Fortunately, they're a small percentage of the population, but they make a big impact on everybody else.
Eventually on this podcast, I cover a lot of subjects: UFOs, ghosts.
I looked at your podcast.
Yeah,
I saw that. Why does he want me on his? podcast?
Yeah. Health and wellness. I have health and wellness on there.
Paranormal stuff, and
I'm going to start reaching out to more law enforcement regarding cold cases and things that might need more attention, because there's some cases where I live, someone I know from childhood who was murdered, and nothing ever came of it, ever.
Right.
And it makes me wonder, like, with today's technology and all the online sleuths and all these tipsters out there, like, what light could be shed upon that case? You never know.
I got to tell you, and I'm actually involved in a show, developing a show that's going to come up maybe on Netflix in the next year or so about exactly this, cold cases, because these cold cases are sitting on shelves in police departments all over the country, and all they have to do is pull them down. If they still have the evidence, they can retest it. You hear it all the time. 50-year-old murder solved.
Yeah.
Because somebody had the evidence retested using today's technology, and it's there. But somebody has to pull that evidence off the shelf. The problem is most of these agencies are too small. They don't have enough experience. And so that's what the show which the working title of right now is The Long Thaw. Even is to go get these cases and do the lab work on them and talk to the people.
Right. Even on this podcast, I'm going to reach out to law enforcement. I don't know how many going to receive because, again, like you said, when you look at my podcast, see the UFOs and whatever. That's just that's my childhood curiosity at play.
Yeah,
I want to know. I'm going to do a documentary, and if I go out there and I don't come back, you know what happened. You know what I mean? So.
Hey, I'm cool with that. By the way, I'm kind of I'm interested in UFOs, but I'm a closet ghost guy. I watch those ghost shows and stuff.
I just had a guy in the show.
I believe that exists, so I'm cool with that.
I had a guy in the show. I'm bringing it back on the 26th. His name's Dan Spell. He's a former Department of Defense agent. And I'm going to team him with this guy, Mike Penicello, who's extremely analytical. And then I'm going to use them for case reads. But beyond that point, I want to reach out to law enforcement. And again, I don't know how well received I'll be. I'm going to speak to them and let them know. I'm not here to scrutinize. I want to shed light on these cases because today, the exposure from it takes one person to listen to a podcast and be like, oh my God, blah, blah, blah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
That's it. You never know what that means.
I've done hundreds of podcasts on this. Let me tell you, I've done hundreds of podcasts. And it's a real, first of all, people are interested in it, but there's never been a better time to investigate cold cases because the technology is so advanced. It advanced more in the last 3 years than it did in the previous 30 years.
Yeah, it's a leapfrog.
That's the thing, yeah.
I always say this, if people could evolve like a technology, we'd be a much better species.
Oh my God. Yeah, you're exactly right about that.
It's a shame.
The problem is, like I said, these cases are sitting on shelves and nobody's looked at them for 20 years. Get off your ass and pull that case off the shelf and go through it. Yeah, that's what I say.
I say this on every podcast, whether it be you and I, law enforcement, or a UFO or Bigfoot. No information's bad information. You just have to filter right.
That's exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
And you have to filter right means you might filter and find something that leads to something as opposed to never knowing.
It happens all the time. Because they bring these cases down and they use advanced technology and wow, there's a DNA profile there. Let's run it and code us. Oh wow, it matches this guy. Yeah. Or else or it sounds like it could be these two people. Well, this guy's dead. Let's go get his family's DNA. Oh, it was him. That happens all the time.
Yeah, listen, I got a warning to murderers. There are teams of crazy people with cell phone cameras that will follow your every move. You know what I mean?
Exactly,
so it's not like you could just get away, right? So if you introduce a cold case,
getting away today are much less than they used to be.
Yeah, and I got to be honest, man. There's some people. I did some research into this, and I read some of the blogs out there. There's a woman out there. She's just a house mom, but God, her brain is with it. She is sharp.
Oh, yeah.
If you give her, like she listened to this podcast and heard a cold case, and you gave her 3 parts of any story, she will dig endlessly. And I promise you, there's the lead. That's what it takes.
You know what? That's the audience for your podcast. Are these women sitting around listening to stuff because they are into it. That's my experience.
They're sharp
into
minds,
this, and they're serious. And I got to tell you, one of my favorite things to talk about is genealogy, and that's the real murder she wrote of today, because the person doing the genealogy is some little old lady who's a genealogist digging through stuff and can trace stuff back to the Mayflower and building the family trees and saying, okay, I got it narrowed down to these 3 people. Those are the real, they never get in front of the cameras. They're always the behind the scenes people, but they're the ones doing this work with forensic genealogy that's incredible and doing the little old ladies, basically, not all of them, some are young ladies, but a lot of them little old ladies just sitting there digging through files, and they trace these family trees and down to a certain point, and then they give the information to the detective, and it's up to the detective to go out and find out which one of these people it is. But they'll narrow it down to 3 or 4 people.
Listen, where I live in my neighborhood, the lady next door, nothing happens here. She knows it all.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing goes down here.
Like I said, I get a lot of feedback from people that read my books, and women are the biggest true crime fans. My wife watches true crime. I can't watch that. I don't watch that. I said, I don't watch true crime. I said to my friends that work at Boeing, do you go home at night and watch airplane building movies? No, you don't. This is what I do for a living.
No one sits around watching a lawnmower show.
Spend my off time doing it, but my wife will be. I have to go in the other room, and she's watching all these true crime shows. And I have a friend who's an executive producer at 48 Hours, and I'll watch the shows he does, and now I'll watch shows where friends of mine are on the show, which happens all the time. But I just can't sit and watch that stuff myself. But it's true. Women are the biggest audience.
It's true, yeah, because that's my aunt, my mom, same thing. They go down that rabbit hole. They will watch something something with suspense in it, and here's the thing now. They draw conclusions. And again, and this is for, any law enforcement that listens to this podcast. We talk about cold cases. It takes that one person to hear that one piece of information for them to hop on that computer and spend what you would pay someone $65,000 a year, they'll do for free.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot, and they come up with good stuff sometimes. I'm never averse to hearing that. They're not always right, but at least they're working hard, and they might be right sometime. Yeah.
Like I said, man, no information's bad information. You have to filter. That's
exactly right.
You got to learn how to filter it right. I don't know. So I'm gonna reach out to law enforcement. I'm definitely gonna have you on more often, so I'm gonna pick your brain over the course of time.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
And I have a lot of friends that I could turn you on to, and
by all means.
Like
as you can see how this is, the format is, it's laid back. It's not invasive. I'm not gonna sit there and go, well, I don't believe in putting someone in a position so you can get shock and awe. So it's for you to get some likes. That's dumb.
But you don't need to, because the stories are interesting enough, usually.
Yeah, especially when it's over good conversation.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
So earlier you were talking about you've seen evil, looked it in the eye. What case did you work that gave you chills? I asked this a lot to a lot of people.
Oh, my gosh. It's hard to answer because I've seen so much, nothing shocks me anymore. I mean, I always say I've seen a lot of terrible things. I never let it personally affect me, but the thing that always affects me is when I see kids butchered.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of kids butchered, from little babies to 10-year-olds and stuff like that. And those, because they're helpless. And so, an adult, 90% of people who get murdered put themselves in a position to get murdered by their lifestyle or decisions they make, right? These children do not. They're innocent. And so it's hard for me. And I always have to, I go to these scenes and there's a little child butchered or murdered. And, I might take 1 second to say, Jesus Christ. And then, boom, and then I'm back in work mode, because I'm not doing anybody any favors if I am all upset and obsessing about how terrible this is. My job is to get the son of a bitch that did it, right?
Yeah,
so I have to go back and work mode until I get that guy. And then when I go home, and I have 3 sons, and when they were younger, I'd hug them a little closer on the couch on that Friday night or something. But they're all adults now, and 2 of them are cops, actually. But that always bothered me. I never liked going to a medical examiner and watching an autopsy of a baby. Is a terrible thing. I never wanted to do it, but
that's got to have a tremendous psychological effect, especially when you have children.
Yeah, absolutely. But as far as chilling, there's chilling as far as when I hear stuff. When I talk to people who are not cops, like my wife's friends, and I tell them something, and they're like, "Oh my God!" And I'm thinking, "Really? I didn't think that much of it." Because it's what I do, right? And that's what caused me to write my first book, because every story I told about what I was doing at work, everybody's going, "Oh my God, that's incredible!" And I thought, really, that's just what I do for a living. I didn't think it was that incredible, but so it's hard for me to say, what's chilling to me. There's things. First of all, when these people are telling me these terrible things they did, my feeling isn't chilling. My feeling is, I got this bastard. Right? That's my thought. Right. I'm handing him the rope and he's putting it around his own neck.
You can understand why people are in awe of your stories, because, keep in mind, there's a guy who teaches geography and he comes home and tells the family, okay, great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a little different. First of all, there's definitely no question that my stories are a little more interesting or fascinating to people that don't live this life like I do.
Speaks to humanity, right? We're attracted to it.
Thank God. Thank God they don't think it's normal, right? I might be. There's something wrong with me that I don't think it's.
Yeah, I'm one of these people. I'll tell you, Cloyd, if eventually going to go out and do a documentary, and obviously it's going to be about more supernatural stuff.
Right,
but I'm one of those weirdos. I run at the problem, right?
Oh yeah,
that's probably not a good thing because like even in the house, I personally have never witnessed anything supernatural.
Right.
So for me, if I think the excitement would overwhelm me, and I'd probably run out with a camera, and it might be the greatest footage ever I bring home, or it might be the last thing anyone sees me do. Who knows? So.
Like I said, I'm a closet ghost freak. I love watching those shows. I went down to Virginia City, Nevada, a couple of years last year, and we were in the Washoe Club, which is where Ghost Adventures got started. Right. And I'm this guy's giving us a tour, and I'm just snapping pictures with my phone of this area, and I got home and there were all these orbs in these pictures, and that was weird. People ask me all the time, have you ever seen anything supernatural? And I say, I haven't really, but the closest I came was one year I was one night, I was investigating a rape and murder of an 87-year-old woman in her apartment in downtown Seattle, right by the monorail tracks. And I stood over her body, and she was naked from the waist down with a knife in her throat. And I stood over her body just looking at her, and I muttered to myself, who did this to you, Esther? That was her name, Esther. And for whatever reason, my attention went to a box of checks on the table. And I went over to that box of checks, and I went through them, and I found out that one of the packets of checks in the middle of that box was missing. And so long story short, I went to the bank, said, if somebody tries to cash these checks, don't deny it, just stall and call the police. The next day, somebody tried to cash one of the checks, and we got this person, and it wasn't the killer, but within 16 hours, we'd had the guy in custody, all because of that. And I wondered, did she point me to those checks? Yeah. I always wondered that because I just said, who did this to you, Esther? And all of a sudden, my attention was drawn to these checks. Yeah, which was kind of weird.
You'd be surprised, especially like detectives, like yourself. It's your intuition. I say this a lot. There's a lot about our brain we don't know. A lot.
No, exactly. I agree.
And if you are so focused on something, you could do people could do amazing things when they're focused on it. An example would be like, for me, Michael Jordan. That guy wanted to be the greatest basketball player.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He focused intently on that, and he done amazing things.
And it became it, yeah.
Right. So the level of focus you apply to something, who knows what the mind's capable of?
Not to ring my own bell, but when I was when I became a police officer, I was like 21, right at my 21st birthday. And my goal was, I want to be a homicide detective. And not only that, I want to be recognized as a really good homicide detective. And, a few years later, there I was. And I don't, and people tell me that, I was a great homicide detective. I don't want to call it myself, but because that was my goal, and that's what I did. And so I just did everything. A lot of friends would say, how the heck did you ever get a job I grew up with? How'd you get a job as a homicide detective? And I said, well, I looked at what you had to do that. And I did it.
Yeah, exactly, man. That's legitimately
what it is.
It's
just a matter of setting your goal and doing it.
That's like, listen, when I want to start this podcast, I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't know what I'm doing, but I'm learning.
Right, yeah.
And I will research something feverishly, right? Just like when I knew I was going to have you on the show, I reached out to you, and again, I'm really glad I got you. I started researching more of the work that you were around, and then the serial kills, and then the homicide detectives. For those who listen, that is not an easy, relaxed job like TV. That's work.
Oh, no.
That is work, man.
My phone will ring at 1:30 in the not anymore. My phone would ring at 1:30 in the morning, and I'd answer it, and I'd get up and go to work, and I might be at work for 36 hours straight. I never knew, right? It happened all the time, though.
And it's rough, too.
It's hard. It's hard.
You could see the desire to close the case written on the faces of some of the stuff I was.
Oh yeah.
There's a show. I was just watching a bit of it. I didn't get really into it. It's called First 48.
Oh yeah.
And you could see the aggravation. You could just tell they don't want the cameras there, right? You could just tell they just want to do their job and get their job done. They don't want to be bothered. And when the more that time passes, you could see the aggravation. And for you, the serial killer, I could imagine the level of aggravation with that.
I got to tell you, did a documentary one time, and the director had worked on First 48. He goes, "You ever watch that?" And I go, "Hell no, I don't watch that. I live that."
Yeah. Again, it goes back to the guy who works at the burger place. You don't go home to watch.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to watch burger flipping when you get home.
Right. My goodness, man. So yeah, go ahead. You finish what you're saying. You're on a case.
I forgot I forgot completely what I was going to say.
My bad. I do that to people so often.
That's all right. Yeah.
Well, the guy was a director for the First 48.
Oh, that was him. He just asked me, Did you ever watch that?" And No, I don't watch that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What cases, I guess we'll ask this. What case did you work where you found it, there was some stress there, you were actually out putting work in? It was a difficult case to work with. Oh,
first of all, about 300 of them, I don't know. But yeah, I remember going to a case. I was actually on vacation. It was over the holidays, and I was home, and my partner called me and he said, I'd never call you on a murder for just some, routine gangbanger murder, but I got a real innocent victim. This girl was stabbed to death and she seems like a real victim. And I went in, and this was a 25-year-old girl, moved to Seattle from Ohio because she loved the mountains and went to work for the Sierra Club and wanted to do all this environmental stuff. And some psychopath just followed her one night and stabbed her to death outside her apartment. And so, and I met her parents. They flew up a couple of days later. Of course, they were devastated. And I told them that, we're going to do everything we can to get this person, and I'm going to get him for you. And I didn't know in my heart if I really would be able to. You never know.
Right.
But so I worked that case 18 hours a day for like 5 days, and I got the guy. And he confessed to me. And it was such a satisfying call to call the father and tell him I got, again, excuse me for repeating this phrase, I got this son of a bitch, is what I told him. And he's crying over the phone and stuff. And then finally we went to we're going to trial, and this guy insists on pleading guilty. And the father gave me a big hug at the end and said, "You're a good man, Cloyd." That meant a lot to me. It was, because first of all, I always tell these people, don't call me Detective Steiger when your family member's been murdered. I'm Cloyd. Right. Here's my direct line. Here's my cell number. Call me anytime, because, I can't know, thank God, what it's like to lose a child like that. But I know a lot of people who have, and I know you never get over it. There's no such thing as closure. I hear it all the time. Oh, at least the family can have closure. No, they won't. It's better to know who did it. They'll feel better about that, but they'll never have closure. They'll never for the rest of their lives get over their child being murdered. So, that's what I'm working for. I'm working for that family that's left there. That's why, like I said, I can't get all upset and crying and sobbing over the victim, because I'm not doing that family any favors by doing that. I have to just be focused to get this son of a bitch and hold him responsible and arrest him. And that's what I did. That's, that was my whole aim, was just to,
that's greatly appreciated, right? Because we need more detectives like that. If they don't exist, I mean, I don't know, but for a family to know,
I think most homicide detectives are like that. I don't think I was that unusual. Yeah, I mean, maybe not all, but almost most. Anybody who stays and successful as a homicide detective thinks like that.
Yeah.
I was nothing special. I was just a guy doing my job. So,
well, for families, that's a huge relief to see someone cares and they're invested.
Yeah. No kidding. Like I said, it doesn't matter if you're a Wall Street banker or if you're a gangbanger on the corner. Everybody's got a mama, and a mama loved them, and they're upset by this, right?
Yeah, and justice is just justice at the end of the day.
That's exactly right. Justice is justice.
That's again why I want to reach out to law enforcement and work on and get some cold cases on the show. Yeah, is it interesting? Sure. Do I want to hear about it? Sure. I'll tell you why. Because it bugs me to know that there's, like I said, that family out there that they're sitting around just. It's mortifying. The person responsible is walking around.
And I hear from them all the time. They send me messages on Facebook or whatever. Can you solve my son's murder? He was murdered. I really can't, because I don't have control of the evidence or anything. I mean, I can do whatever I can. This is what you need to ask for, things like that. But it's a helpless fit. I get these messages every week from somebody who's, especially the ones that are long-term missing, that have never been found. And I don't have any information. I don't have access to what the police did. I don't have access to the physical evidence. You got to ask for this and this and this to be done. I'll give them as much advice as I can, but it's hard.
It's tough. Yeah. I mean, for me, I would be restless, right? Because I would want to know. Yeah. I could predict to a certainty that if it happened to like my daughter, I would come unglued.
Oh, of course you would.
And everybody. My life would not be normal after that. I don't know if
I used to tell people, when my boys were small, if something happens to one of my boys and the person that did it ends up being dead, I did it. You maybe haven't prove it, but I did it. I just want you to know. And that's true. That's anything.
For me, they better book a flight to Mars and hope I can't afford my own. You know what I mean? Because
Right. Yeah.
It's sad. And that's, again, I'm definitely going to reach out to more law enforcement. I have. And again, I get well, who are you, et cetera, et cetera. I'll build that rapport over time. But before we close tonight, let's talk about your book.
Okay.
And I want to, so obviously we're going to put it in the comments because I want to read it. It's got me, right? And so someone approached you to write it about the serial killer?
Well, the first one was my own. People kept saying, you got to write a book. You got to write a book. So it's about my experiences as a homicide detective. Right. That's Homicide, The View from Inside the Yellow Tape. And then a year or two later, I just got a call from a publisher. Hey, we're looking, would you write a book about a older historic murder in your region? And okay. And they, that one, they only wanted, I forgot how many words, but it's only like 120-page book with like 50 pictures. That's all they wanted. And it was like, okay, I can do that. And they put it out and they did it. But it's my own book about my experiences is a 300 and some page book. And it's a lot of little stories about cases that I worked. Some of them are only a couple paragraphs about something interesting that happened. Some of them are entire chapters about the case. And so, because people would always ask me to tell stories about what I did, and it's gotten a lot of really good reviews, and it shocked me. And I've sold several thousand copies, and that shocked me too. So,
well, I want to be privileged. So what I'm going to do is maybe have you on a few more, once a month, maybe we'll talk about the stories.
Anytime.
Because I would like to hear them, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
Here's the other thing too, real quick. And I got this question from a friend of mine. This is probably him in the sci-fi mind, but it might have something because, again, you never know. What are the chances serial killers are advancing with technology as far as forensic cover-up?
I mean, they are, because it's a problem. And anytime there's a problem, there's somebody out there working to solve that problem. And it's because of capitalism. They can make money, which I'm perfectly fine with. You know what? They developed, a good friend of mine is the president of MVAC Corporation, which is the biggest leap in DNA collection in decades, and MVAC is he wasn't my friend before he developed this. We became friends after this, but his father actually invented it. It's a wet vacuuming system, kind of like a carpet cleaner, where it shoots sterile material down into a surface and then sucks it back up.
Right.
And you have the water, and then you pour that through a filter, and then have the filter tested for DNA. The FBI did studies on it. It's like 1,400% more likely to collect DNA than swabbing or ketting or things that we've done in the past. So that's how you're seeing all these cases that you can get it off anything. You can get it off a rock. You can get it off something that's been underwater for a while. You can get it off things you could never, off the sticky side of tape. You can't swab the sticky side of tape because it destroys the swab.
Right.
But with MVAC, you can vacuum, you put this stuff and get usable DNA. And there's story after story after story of how this has solved cold cases, on cases that they'd already done DNA on. One was a girl in Utah was found murdered along a river, and there was a rock by her with blood on it, and it was used to bash her head in, right? And they swabbed it and didn't find anything. Well, several years later, the detectives down there wanted to have the MVAC do it, so they MVAC'd the rock and got usable DNA, identified a suspect, and arrested him. And so that's just one of dozens of stories that came up. And that's one of the advancement in DNA technology is the ability to collect DNA. And then, of course, the other thing is they use. I used to get, when I get DNA cases, they'd say, we found so-and-so's DNA on this, and the probability is 1 in 54 quintillion, which is 54 and 18 zeros. That's a big ass number. That's what I always tell my suspects. Oh my God. But now, because of the way they used to do 13 loci, now they do 21 loci, which is the spots on the genome, and you're getting numbers like 54 to the 50th power, which is 54 and 50 zeros. So I mean, it's like, these are, I can't tell you what I would tell my suspects when I had numbers like that. Well, I will tell you. You can bleep it out if you want. I'd say there's a legal term for the situation you find yourself in today, and they go, there is. I go, yeah, you're fucked. That's what I would say to him. It's true.
Right.
Yeah.
No. By the way, speak freely. I don't have my audience is not going to be below 13.
Promise. I didn't think so, but I didn't know. Yeah.
But so here's the fear of that, right? Like, again, to what this question was stating is like, are serial killers going to get more advanced? Or I guess, listen, we all know that contract killers have to be, or at least the way they depict
although
them.
I got to tell you, that happens so much less than people believe. The hitman, the whole hitman story. First of all, where do you find a hitman? Do you look at Hitmen R Us? Most of the time when you're talking to a hitman, it's somebody that's going to call the police and you're going to get stung. I had several of those where, someone would hire him to kill his family. Well, the guy happens to be an informant of mine. He'd call me up. Hey, this guy wants me to kill his whole family. And I'd set up a sting to get the guy on tape saying how he wants him to kill his whole family and arrest his ass, right? Because it's not that easy and it doesn't happen as often.
No,
in fact, you can try all you want, but you still have to physically touch things. You don't have to, before it used to be, you had to exchange biological material, but now you just have to touch something, right? That's all you got to do.
Yeah,
you got to touch something, and your DNA is there. So it's just like, and hair is it used to be if you found hairs at a scene, you could only get DNA if it was in the root, but now you can get molecular DNA from the middle of a shaft of a hair you could never do before, and it's just so much.
It's incredible.
It's incredible.
So to answer his question is, it doesn't look, unless the serial killer has remarkable resources, not going to happen.
Unless he's wearing a body condom,
and then he'll be very identifiable in public, right?
Well, exactly. Well, the thing is, most serial killers. I mean, I had a serial killer that shot his victims, right? But that's unusual.
Right.
Most of them, it's the thrill of strangling and the close encounter and the feeling of power and their hands on either ligature or on manual strangulation, which, by the way, is also much more difficult than people believe. And so it's that up close and personal stuff. That's the whole thing that gives them their thrill.
Right.
But if you do that, you're going to leave DNA. You can't do that without leaving DNA.
That's true. I watched this whole thing recently too with the Zodiac Killer.
Yeah, right.
And I got to tell you, man, after watching 2 or 3 of those in the last week, preparing for you, I came to a strange conclusion on the timeline and the vastness there. I almost feel like there's not one Zodiac. I almost feel like there's one maybe initiated, and then the rest of them, and there's more of them. And I think they're benefiting from his name for either the popularity of the thrill and/or great cover.
Right. It is there's a lot of them that do that because to try to hide under that thing. A couple of friends of mine did a thing for the History Channel called The Zodiac Killer. That was Ken Maines and Sala Lababera.
Yeah, it's one of the ones I watched.
Oh yeah. Those guys are friends of mine. And the thing is, and it's like, you got to do the lab work to find out. Do all these things up. Like I said, do the MVEC and see if the DNA matches. Right? If it doesn't match, it's not. Yeah,
because for that Zodiac case and what I was reading, there's some discrepancy in the height and build of the actual killer, right? Which led me, and then you think about the cipher itself, and I think that show said it too. It seems like it's former military cipher.
Yeah,
and then you
got to wonder that because it's pretty sophisticated. It's not something that some guy made up in his garage, right?
Yeah, and there's no I'm pretty certain there's no template for ciphers out there, right? They have to make them up because they could be compromised, so they have to make them as they go.
Yeah,
so
absolutely, yeah.
Everything about that tells me there's a circle of people. Whether they know each other or not, I don't know, but I think it's very convenient. Yeah, I think they were, one guy played off the thrill of it, and another one probably played. I could cover my tracks, and they'll blame this guy, and I'll get away with it. That's what it sounds like. But
that could happen. I don't know enough about that case to make any judgments about it. People ask me about it all the time, and I say, well, I only know probably as much or less than you do about it, because I don't read about. Unless somebody asks me to like on a podcast, something. Hey, what's your opinion on this? And then I read up and study it. I just don't because there's so many things going on.
Yeah. So, Cloyd, are there any shows that you want to let everyone know about in advance?
Well, like I said, I'm supposed to start filming pretty soon on a show called the working title of it right now is The Long Thaw. about cold cases, where we go to myself, a friend of mine who's a behavioralist criminologist from London. I mean, not London. He's in London now, but he's from Ontario, and then a lab person, friend of mine from down in the San Diego area, who have reached out to these small agencies that just don't have the resources, and say, we will take your case, investigate it, and do the up to the minute lab work, and it will cost you not a dime. And that's the big draw for them, because it's very expensive to have this done. We'll pay for everything.
Yeah, and if you got Netflix behind you, forget it. The sky's the limit.
Well, that's the thing. And so we've got it's three or four cases in Arkansas we're working on right now. One actually locally in the Seattle area where I am, and we hope to start filming that in the next month or two. And like I said, it looks like it could be on Netflix, although it's not necessarily for sure.
Yeah, not locked in.
Yeah, it's not locked in, but they're shopping it, and we have financing to film it without having sold it yet. So we'll get it all filmed, and then we'll see how it goes.
That's great. Cloyd Steiger, I got to have you on a lot. I enjoy
anytime,
talking,
man. And I'll do it. I do. First of all, I already do dozens and dozens and dozens of podcasts, and I'm always available if you need me. Let me know.
Good. You'll hear from me plenty. Trust me, because I'm super interested in it. And I like learning. That's my big thing. I like to learn. But otherwise, Cloyd, I enjoyed having you tonight thoroughly.
Yeah, me too, Adam. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, sir. You have a good night.
All right. You too. Bye.